you get drugs through visits, and sometimes it's through staff. So there's whatever the movement in and out of prisons is, whether it's through visitors or staff or through, directly throwing stuff into the compounds. That's the way drugs get in. But also, there's sometimes prisoners who come in on remand, are coming in to prisons plugging drugs. So they know that they're going to go to court. They know that they're going to get a custodial sentence or they're going to be remanded. And they come in packed with drugs. And that's a very, very risky thing because, those drugs, they can, have accidents, which will mean that those drugs, rupture inside them. We've had deaths in custody where people have come in carrying drugs and, sadly lost their lives.
Well, let's speak now to Pia Sinha, the former governor of HMP Liverpool, who's now chief executive of the Prison Reform Trust. Good morning, Pia.
Good morning.
And this story, the Times sent in Paul Morgan Bentley as an investigative reporter to reveal how easy it is to sort of gain access as an official into prisons. What do you make of this claim that that gangs are putting in prison officers effectively to run drugs operations in prisons themselves? Is that something that sounds likely to you?
Well, it's probable and likely, but the scale of it is still something that we don't know for sure. But our history would suggest that when you have prisons that are in the state that our current prisons are in, you import risk. And one of the things that's really important in prisons is order and control and legitimacy. And when that doesn't happen in prisons, you are laying yourself vulnerable to criminality and criminal activity happening in prisons because there's a vacuum of power and there's a vacuum of order within the estate. And that makes it vulnerable for criminal activity to flourish in those circumstances because no one really knows who's in charge.
And why is there a vacuum of order? Are there not enough officers? Do the officers have not enough powers? What's the problem there?
So, I've described it as the perfect storm. So what you have at the moment is that you have an overcrowding crisis in prisons. We've got way too many people in prison. And you've got a recruitment and retention crisis. So that means you've got way too few staff. And when that happens, the normal routines that prisons should be governed by go by the wayside. You've got too many prisoners to manage and too few staff, which means that the regimes that prisons need to run safely and in an ordered way become limited. And that means that prisoners themselves have very few opportunities for purposeful activity. They're often sitting in their cells, bored, overcrowded, with nothing to do. And that increases demand for drugs. And when there's an increased demand for drugs, then it allows criminal activity to thrive within those places.
And how do they get?
And that leads to also.
And how do they get drugs, Pia? Because I was visiting a prison once, and the person there was telling me that sometimes they just throw them over the wall. Someone said they used a drone to sort of fly them over a wall. How easy is it to get drugs in prison?
I think that, where there's a will, there's a way. So there's all sorts of ways that drugs come into prison, but it has to come over the boundary walls. And you do have drones that drop drug parcels directly into the prison grounds. You get throwovers across the walls, but also you get drugs through visits, and sometimes it's through staff. So there's whatever the movement in and out of prisons is, whether it's through visitors or staff or through, directly throwing stuff into the compounds. That's the way drugs get in. But also, there's sometimes prisoners who come in on remand, are coming in to prisons plugging drugs. So they know that they're going to go to court. They know that they're going to get a custodial sentence or they're going to be remanded. And they come in packed with drugs. And that's a very, very risky thing because, those drugs can have accidents, which will mean that those drugs, rupture inside them. We've had deaths in custody where people have come in carrying drugs and, sadly lost their lives.
I say it's an election year. We're never going to see this in an election year. But would you in order to have a prison system that functions, do we need fewer people in it? Do the government, whatever government stripe it is, actually say we need to lock up some people who are dangerous, and we need to make sure that the prison actually serves its purpose. But we can't have so many people coming in, because if we compare ourselves to the rest of Europe, we have loads and loads of people in prison. We have very high recidivism rate. Prison doesn't seem to function very well in this country compared to other European countries, for example.
Well, I would agree, and I think this is why this commission is so crucial and it's so important. I think we need to have a rational, evidence-based debate about what the purpose of prison is. And if you look at the makeup of the prison population, a vast majority of the people that end up in prison are there because of poverty, because of substance misuse issues, because of poor mental health. And these individuals are better served if we provide the care and support for them in the community so that they're diverted away from crime in the first place. There are people who definitely do need to be in prison. And for those prisons, for those people who are in prison, because you're not dealing with the pressure of overcrowding and you have fewer people who need to be there within the estate, you can then provide the actual interventions and support that they need so that you can address some of their issues and some of their rehabilitation needs. But when you've got an overcrowded prison where you've got so many people in there, you're not being able to do any meaningful work. And in fact, for some, especially with the onset of criminality in prisons, you're actually leaving them in a worse state than when they first got in.